It's Wednesday, which of course means another demo. And today we're going to be talking about doing the dappled light that you see often on these really nice sunny days like today. It's a little bit sunny out. But anyway, I love to see how the light is filtered through the leaves on the trees and that sort of thing. And that can actually be such a really interesting element in your painting. Can really transform an otherwise like if it was an overcast day, for example, it could really transform that scene into something completely different when you have dappled light. So let's talk about that. All right, so we have this image here. The link to this reference photo is actually in the description below, and you can find that there. And before I forget, because this is something I completely forget every single week, I think, if you don't subscribe, please do. I always forget to say that, and I know you're supposed to remind people because it is easy to forget, but it would help me out a lot. So thank you so much if you're subscribing. So I am just wetting my palette right now. I usually do this a little bit before, but I was running a little behind today. So I'm just softening up all my colors. And you can see I'm adding a generous amount of paint, or sorry, I'm adding a generous amount of water to my paint. There we go. I think I got most of it. These paints, by the way, I am using Da Vinci watercolor, and let me pull this over for a moment so you can see it a little larger. You can see I'm adding a fair bit of water to this, and basically they're all submerged. When I do this to get the paint back to a creamy consistency, and it does take quite a bit of water for that to actually happen. If I were just to start painting and all my wells were really dry, I would really have a difficult time getting some of my rich colors. So I see this all the time, especially with beginners. They might buy the cakes or something like that, and they have a little bit of trouble getting their colors rich enough. And that is mostly because they're working with dried color, and it takes a while to soften it up again. So I'm putting a fair bit on there. I haven't cleaned off my palette or anything like that today. So like I said, I'm running a little behind, but no worries. I was working on something else yesterday. And while I'm at it, while this is softening up and that sort of thing, I want to talk about one other little thing. This is a water container, and you can see it's got a little bit of residue at the bottom. It's a little bit of blue, like you can see right through it. It's not really dirty water, but you can see that it has a little bit of blue at the bottom. And some of you were concerned about just dumping this down the drain. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this over to the sink, and I'm going to pour it all out, and then I'll show you what I do with that little bit of residue at the bottom. Okay, so this part here, I don't try to rinse this out under the tap. What I'm doing is I'm just wiping this out with a towel and disposing that in the regular garbage. So now I have that residue gone, and the blue that I just picked up off the bottom, that's not going to go down the drain. So hopefully that's a helpful little tip for you before we get started. And I'm going to get some fresh. Okay. So now that we have our paints are softening up and that sort of thing, we need to get to some of the drawing on this. Now the reference picture is actually way longer than my sheet of paper here. I'm working on a block of Bauhong 360 by 260 millimeters, or 14.1 inch by 10.2 inch. It's always an oddball size, isn't it? But I'm going to take a regular pencil. This isn't anything special. It's an HB pencil. Get an eraser here ready for any corrections that I need to do. And I want to map out the general area of where the where the elements are. So I notice in this particular instance that the horizon is, or at least the far shore, is pretty much in the middle. I do want to include, I really like the dappled light at the very bottom of the trees where you see it on the ground. So what I might do here is, let me just readjust this picture to include a little bit more of that. Get my horizon up just a little bit higher. There. Okay, so I think I've got that a little bit higher now. So I like that sort of composition. So think about the composition before you start sketching out, because the placement of your horizon is important, but also, what it is you want people to see. Do you want people to see the tree part? Do you want them to see the shadow part? I rather liked the shadow part here, so I'm going to go with that. So I'm going to put my horizon a little bit higher. This is actually the shore of another, on the other side of the stream here. This was a little river. I'll try to do it dark enough for you to see, but I really don't like doing my pencil lines too dark. But I will always start really light and then lock them in with a darker drawing. So I've got one tree here. Comes down. Before I lock in that tree, I think I want to get the shoreline here, or the foreground. I like how this kind of comes up on that irregular hill there. And okay, so now I have where I'm going to put my tree here. I like the asymmetry of the placement of these trees as well. If I had 3 trees all lined up in a row, that would be very uninteresting in a composition. But I like the pair over here and then the single on the left. So, and I'm really making an effort not to make these too straight like telephone poles. Very, very tempting to do. And when your trees come down to the ground, they almost always do a little tiny bit of a flare. Let me see if I can zoom in a little bit on this so you can see what I'm talking about. So the bottom of the tree, rather than having it just stop dead right there, the root system starts coming out. So to help connect the tree to your landscape, a slight bit of curve is very helpful to help that feel a little bit more sort of planted in place, and rather than just being stuck on the surface there. Sorry, my camera does not really love, here, maybe if I set that there, it will stay in focus. It doesn't like white paper. That's the problem with the camera. Different angle here. So, this one's kind of this way and then bent. This one's more straight, but definitely angled. It's not straight. Whenever you are drawing out your trees, do try to make some variety. It will make your painting a lot more interesting. And that little flare. Which one's in front? This one's in front. They kind of overlap each other there. Okay, then we have a few branches that come out. I won't draw too much of this because the branches I'd rather do with my brush. you know, these are the main elements, right? The far shore. So let's establish that, the far shore. The land here. And I don't even think I need to draw anything else here. I think I'm going to let a lot of this happen just with my brush. So the first thing that I'm going to be looking at when I'm painting this scene, I didn't print this out this time, I don't know why, but the first thing I'm going to be looking at when I take a look at this scene is the light areas, okay? So I want to paint the areas where the sun is hitting everything. While I'm doing that, I can also paint through the shadows, because the shadows can be added on top, which can be done very easily. This tree actually flares out a little bit more. There we go. Trying to get all the little character of the tree. And I'm going to erase a couple of things, just sort of where the lines cross through here, just to better establish what I'm doing here. Try not to do too much erasing on my actual paper. If I'm doing a painting that's going to be fairly complicated, what I will do, rather than working a lot on my actual paper, is I will draw it on a separate piece of paper, and then we'll transfer it using graphite paper or something like that. All right, so let's zoom out and we'll get down some first washes here. All right, for this I'm going to be using a nice large brush. So this is a number 4, just to show you comparison to my thumb. That's the size, and I'm going to be putting down some color. So let's figure out what colors we're going to be using here. I think I'm going to be using a little bit of cobalt in this sky. And see how easy that was to get that color out of there. There was no scrubbing of the dry paint or anything like that. So I've got my cobalt. Then I've got that distant shore. It's really it's a soft green. So I'm going to be using, once again, I'm going to be using some of my cobalt. But I want to put some of the areolin in it. Now that's going to make a very, very bright green. So we're going to talk about that for a second. So that's going to make a really bright, vivid green. Let me bring this over to the main screen. I think you'll see the color mixing a little better. Okay, so I've got this very, very bright green, and that's definitely not the color on that back shore. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take green and its complement. I'll go over here to anything in this family over here on my palette. I've arranged my palette like a color wheel. So all my reds are grouped together, my yellows are grouped together, my blues are grouped together, etc. And I'm going to take maybe some burnt sienna this time and add that in. And that's really going to take a lot of that brilliance out of that color. It's going to definitely mute that. So I've got now a very soft, sagey kind of green. I think I'd like to see a little more yellow in it, so I'll just pop a little bit more yellow into that. And that looks like it might be a good option for that distant shore. You can always test it out on a scrap of paper if you have one. Do I have one available? Not right at my within reach here, so I'm just going to keep going. There's going to be some brighter greens in this foreground area. There's also going to be some browns. There's last year's leaves on the ground kind of thing, and so it makes this kind of a dull color. But then amongst that, you do see some, I don't know if that's moss or what that is. But I'm going to use some of this burnt sienna. If that's too red, I could add a little yellow. I could also, I could opt for raw sienna. That would also be another good option, but I can put a little yellow into that. And then we have a more yellowy green at the bottom here. Notice the difference between the yellowy green right here versus the bluer green in the leaves of the tree up here. There's really quite a difference in all of these greens. And I think new painters really aren't noticing those little variations, but I think it's really important. So I'm just taking a glance here at the chat here. Just if you have a question for me today, make sure that you put your question in capitals, because then I can, when I glance up, I can see it very quickly. I don't have somebody else here who can tell me that there's been a question. So I need to kind of sort of glance quickly and spot it. So capitals helps me a lot. So I'm going to use some bit of that. I'm going to make another green, but I'm going to make this one more yellowy for sure. Put a little bit of cobalt into that. So this one's definitely more yellow than blue. And I probably don't have enough of these colors at this point. I'm going to increase the size of these puddles, but just to show you the color mixing, here's what I'm doing. So this is Areolan, nice bright transparent yellow. And some cobalt blue. It's going to be too much, I know it. So rather than mixing it all together, like just stirring it together, I put it off to the side, and then I pull a little of that blue in until I get what I'm satisfied with. Even that, I find that's a little bit too pretty, like a early spring green. And in this particular scene, we haven't got there yet. So this was actually late winter. So we haven't got to the nice springy greens. So I'm going to have to dull that ever so slightly. So I'll take that and I will add the complement. If that's a green, it's kind of a lime green. I'm going to take a little permanent rose here. Barely any, but just enough so that it's not too pretty. In nature, you really don't get any out of the tube colors. You almost always have to mix in nature. So that's, of course, if you are painting something that looks like nature. If you're doing something contemporary and modern with vibrant colors and that sort of thing, well, then that doesn't apply. But when you're trying to recreate nature, I really would suggest muting your colors a little bit so that they don't look too unnatural. All right, so now it's the time to apply it, and I want to think about what needs to happen as I'm applying the color here. So I know I've got all these leaves on the trees in front, but I'm looking through the trees. I'm looking at what's behind all of that. It's all lighter, so I can paint right through all of this. I don't have to stop where the trees are. I don't have to do anything like that. So I'm going to start off with my background. I could wet this first. If you're worried about things blending, you could do that. But how about if I just elevate, I'm just going to use my eraser here and elevate my block just slightly. This is a watercolor block, so it is glued on all the sides. And so it shouldn't wrinkle too much. It will wrinkle, but it won't wrinkle too much. So I'm going to take a little bit of water and dilute this blue a little bit, because I want my colors fairly pale. If I'm working on dry paper, as I'm going to do, I want to make sure that my colors aren't overly strong. If I'm working on wet paper, I do need stronger color for sure. Now, in this scene, I really can't even see that other shore. It just kind of fades. So that's what I'm going to do here. So as I come down, it's definitely bluer at the top. So as I come down, I'm just going to take water. And I'm going side to side here, just hardly touching the paper. It's just really gentle and lots of wet color, of course. And now I'm going to come into that soft green in the background. I actually think that could be a little bit more golden. I'm going to put a little raw sienna in this. Raw sienna. It's more golden looking. All right, so this is going to come down to the water line. Keeping this pale will definitely make this feel like it's further away. If I put down strong color in my background, it tends to jump forward. So I don't want that to happen. Now I've got this funky little line that goes across my trees here, and I really don't want that. So what I'm going to do here is just get down to my line here, and I'm going to rinse my brush and blot it. And this, I'm just going to blend where the tree is here. Right, so I don't have that hard line that's going right through my tree. I'm working with a lot of transparent color here, so any layers that I put on top will look transparent and therefore will show lines that form that are hard. I will need to wait for my water here, I think, because I want to that's actually a lot darker. As I said, I'm really focusing on the lightest areas right now. And I don't want this color bleeding down into my water, so I will just skip over it for now. So I'm going to go back to that raw sienna. I know I started with I said I was starting with burnt sienna, but I think raw sienna is probably a little more appropriate here. So in this area at the bottom, we've got all kinds of green that has to go in here as well. So I'm going to just sort of let these colors blend a little bit. I'll go into I rinsed my brush. I could actually use a second brush if I wanted to, but for some of these greens in here, I want to, almost doesn't look green, it looks almost yellow, but it's quite yellow in the reference as well. So I'm going to want to come in with some of this nice light yellowy color in here. And then right into my raw sienna where it kind of will just connect at the edges. And I'm working fairly quickly so that all this will melt together and I won't have just one solid shape with hard edges and that sort of thing. Now, here's the thing I find happens too much with beginners is that they will put the color down too strong and then they got nowhere to go in terms of darkening things. So as you're putting your color down, remember we are painting light. We are painting the lightest areas, and it does get a little confusing when you look here and you see all those darks and you feel like, oh, it's got to be darker than that. But I want to keep this quite light because I want this to have the feeling that the sun is quite strong. You know, it's very bright sunshine. And I'm working, you notice I'm always working downward. It's because my board is elevated here. I don't always work with my board elevated, but if I'm trying to get things to blend together, elevating your board's a really good way of doing it. Nice full brush. I like this brush. This is a squirrel hair brush, and I can probably add the brushes I'm using in the description as well when I'm done. But this is a squirrel hair brush which holds a lot of water and a lot of paint. And you can see these puddles are on my palette are pretty runny. Now, same as the top, I'm going to just soften this part here. I blotted my brush and I'll just soften those edges. So I have my crisp edges here. I have my soft edges where my trees are. Not worried about taking out the color. It's going to be, you know, that color won't really show through the trees because it'll be very light. But I need to dry this now, so bear with me for a second while I just take my dryer and get this dry. Working wet on wet is a fantastic way for getting colors to melt together. Wet on wet doesn't always mean you wet the paper first. Sometimes you are just putting wet colors down side by side and or on top of each other, and that way you are, you know, basically working wet into wet because everything's wet. When you're drying something like this, dry it evenly. So don't just hold your dryer in one spot. Truthfully, if I were on my own, I would like to have this blend together organically without the help of a dryer. And I find that the colors just sort of mellow together a little bit better when you're not kind of stopping that natural blending process. I always like this stage. I'm getting rid of the white of the paper. You know, the white areas that I'm not going to be needing. And in fact, there really isn't any white that I can see in this reference picture. All right, so I want to talk about the water now. I'm going to be working in smaller sections, so I'll just switch to a smaller brush, same kind of squirrel hair brush. And I'm looking at a blue-gray for sure, with a couple of little areas over here that might be a little bit lighter blue, but some of this green color here may filter into some of this, but I wanted to do it with a little bit more control, so that's why I want to do this separately. I'm going to be using, once again, my cobalt. Into that, I'm going to mix a little neutral tint. I like neutral tint a lot. It's a real nice gray. It's kind of a soft gray. It doesn't make it too dark if you don't want it dark. So I'm going to add that into my blue. Once again, I want it fairly watery or runny, color because I am painting on dry, and the paper's going to soak up that wet paint really, really quick. So it's very important when you are filling in an area to fill your brush. You really do need a full brush as you're working here. So I'm going to just get the color in for now. I'll worry about the textures later, but I just want to get the colors in right now. So now my tree is going to be warm. It's going to have a few light things on it. So this is one instance where I am actually going to be painting around something that is mostly darker. The thing is, it's only mostly darker. It's not completely darker. So I don't want the blue to go right through it. That would definitely kill my my sunshine, the dappled light on my tree. Okay, so I'm still elevated. My board is still elevated a little bit, so this is going to drip down a little bit. If I don't want it darker at the bottom, I could just take and lay it flat, and that would work just fine. Now here in this middle area, I'm going to have a little bit of that green starting to filter into my water. So I don't want to just do green in here. That would be ridiculous because, you know, how could that possibly happen behind that tree? Like some sort of magic trick. All right, so I'm going to rinse my brush for a second. I'm going to pick up some of that background green and get some of that blended in here. And you can see with everything being wet, that blends together really nicely. Didn't have to be too specific about it. I just needed it in that area. A little bit between these trees. Still, again, with some of that sagey kind of green at the background, but not pure. I'm going to have some of the blue in there too. Just let them mingle right on the paper. Now I feel like I've put maybe too much color in there, so I'm just going to drink up, not wiping. Okay, I don't want to wipe here. I just want to get the colors, like pick up a little bit of that excess. Okay, so I have a little bit of reflection suggested there. I'm going to continue with my blue-gray on the other side. And there's a couple of light areas in here. So for the light areas, I'll just paint some water in there. So there's an area in here where it's wet, and otherwise I'm painting on dry paper so that I get variations. I get lights and darks. Make sure I hit some of those lighter areas. I can lift out if I want to lift out a few light areas, I could do that. But the idea is just I want some variations in there. Now this is a stream that everything's running this way, so if I keep my brush strokes going that way, I won't have any oddball weird lines that go up and down. So if I keep everything in that horizontal direction, I should be okay for representing the water. All right, so let's give that a dry, And there's a little bit of light in the water right here too. So I'm just going to lift some of this out right here. Just soft. It's just so I have some variations. I'm not really defining anything. It's just I want to have some different areas of light and dark. Little color variation and that sort of thing. Much better, I think, than just painting a solid, oh, the water is blue, let's paint it all blue, like a coloring book. I think we've all advanced from that, so try to look for little variations. It can make a big difference in your painting, actually. This is a cold pressed paper. It has a little bit of tooth to it, like a little bit of texture. It is 100% cotton. This is the artist quality rather than the student quality. All right, so I've dried that with my heat tool, and I'm going to let that cool back down to room temperature. Could use a little more drying right here. I can always tell when the paper's not fully dry because it's not flat again. Once you dry it, it should be as flat as it started. So now that just has to cool down, and I can start thinking about these trees. And then we'll be done with all of the white of the paper. So I'm looking at the light areas of this tree, and I'm thinking raw sienna. Now it's not really that pretty a color. Raw sienna is fairly clean. Like it's kind of yellowy, as you can see. I'm feeling like that's a little too much, a little bit too pretty. So why don't I take some of this color from the water, that blue that I had, and mix that in. And now I have a little bit more of a nice cool brown, like a tan kind of color. And that's going to give me more the light colors that you see in the tree trunk here. So that's what I'm going to use for my tree trunks. And as I come down, I know that there's going to be some of the leaves that are going to be in front and that sort of thing. So I'm just going to take care of the some of the light areas in the tree trunk, and I'm going to skip over a spot or two where I can put that green, because if I layer them on top of each other, they're really not going to look great together. So I will come in and so right through here, for example, I want to have some green coming across here. So I'm going to skip over and leave a space for that. I think that's the only real spot here. And I'm just going to keep coming down, right down to the ground, the foreground. Got another tree here, and I'm going to stop. Once again, I'm going to stop where there's going to be some greenery crossing in front of the tree. Always be conscious of what is coming next. You have to do a lot of thinking ahead in watercolor, because if you don't think ahead, of course, you're going to get to the point where you're putting the green trees in, or the leaves in, and you're going to go, uh-oh. And then you'll have no space to work there. I am not concerned about making it identical to the photo. The photo's there for my reference only. I'm not painting this scene, needle by needle on these trees. That would be like crazy. And this one I don't see anything in front, so we'll just head on down. Now I'm looking at this image on it's really tiny on my screen here. I should have pulled it up separately, but it's almost better if I'm not seeing it in too much detail, because as soon as I see it in too much detail, though, what's going to happen is I'm going to paint it in detail. And I really don't want to be that committed to perfection here. There, so I've got my trees with a couple of obvious places where I'm going to be putting some branches in front of the tree. All right, so let's talk about these leaves up here, and we'll put those in. And I'm gonna save the best for last. We're gonna do our dappled light at the end. So I need to mix up a nice blue green now. So for this, I'm going to still be using my Aureolin, but I will go with a little bit more blue here. Definitely more blue. I'll bring this over so you can see a bit better. So that's definitely more of a blue-green than what I used down here, for example. The ratio is much greater. But the problem is this is too dark. And it's also probably a little bit too blue. So let's put a little bit more yellow into it. But it's once again, it's one of those colors that just doesn't look like nature. So I want to take a little bit of the complement and hit it so that this doesn't look too unnatural. Taking a little permanent rose to mix into that. Okay, so that feels a little bit better. Okay, so I think I'm getting pretty close now. Maybe a touch more blue. But it's, once again, it's still too dark. These leaves, at least the ones that are crossing in front of the tree, they're in the light. So these need to be very transparent. So I'm talking about thinning down colors in the light, because what happens when you are using transparent color is that you have the light of the paper, the white of the paper is shining through all of this color that I just put down, because I put it down fairly thin. So if I'm doing something that's in the light, the very last thing I would ever want to do is add white paint to make my color lighter. So always use your water for making your colors lighter. White will not only make your colors look grayer, duller, but you won't get that nice warmth of the sunshine. So white is really not your friend when it comes to doing this sort of thing. All right, so let's dabble in some leaves here, or greenery. This is looks to be like maybe a cedar type tree. So I'm getting some of this in here. I like that sort of angle that's coming down. Some of my paint's still wet. And I'm going to do a lot of dabbling, and you'll notice I'm starting to hold my brush a little bit further back. And that's so that I can sort of skip the brush across the surface. You know, like a skipping stone. Your brush can go across the surface of your paper, and it gives you these wonderful natural edges. I'm still thinking that might even be a little bit too much color. Might be all right, but I think I just want to be careful I don't go too dark on this, because I do have some darks that I want to add in, and I need somewhere to go with those darks. I can't just, put down dark and then put dark on dark for a sunny scene. I need to have light underneath. So you notice I'm filling in those gaps. This is a good reminder for me that, these branches are indeed in front of the tree, the trunk. I'm not being too specific or careful about it, but all right. So we've got a few bits in the light, mostly in the foreground here, but hard to tell whether or not on that, just where the green on the shore, like in this spot right here on the reference, whether that is actually in the background or if it's from this tree. And I think it might be in the background. So I'm going to keep this really subtle because I don't want this to suddenly jump forward. If I use really strong color here or make this really high contrast, this is going to jump forward. So and that goes up and it starts to disappear into the darker green. So all right, so there we've got some of that the lighter green leaves to start with, and they don't look, they're very similar in value to what the tree trunk is. So right now, they don't feel like they're light, because everything's comparative in watercolor, where you're looking at something next to something else that you've already done. So it can be a little bit, it can throw you off, basically. I'm going to take a little bit of this color from the tree trunks, and I'm going to put some of that on this back shore here. It looks like there's a bit of something back there on the shoreline. Can't even tell what it is, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time working on something that I can't even tell what it is. I'm just noticing something darker back there. All right, so let's get this dry. All right. Sorry if I'm quiet here. Okay, Jan has a question. When not working live, are you able to sit and paint for long periods of time? Oh, yes. Do I ever? I can paint. I can only paint in 10, 15-minute bursts. Get up, come back, and do it again. Maybe I need better discipline. Well, everybody has their own painting personality. You can tell by a lot of the detailed things that I post. I have spent a lot of time working on something, and I can, if I really get into it, I can be painting for hours on end. So I'm, yeah, I'm kind of a marathon painter. I can work for long periods of time. Uh, I usually will have something to relax me, maybe music or, something in the background. I try not to have too much visual distraction. Like you can't watch a movie and paint at the same time. You can't focus on two things at the same time. So music can be in the background, and that's fine. And but yeah, if you can only work in spurts, that's the way you are. I think I don't think it's anything that is wrong. It's probably a little bit of an advantage to step away from your painting and come back to it and see it with new eyes. That's often a very good thing to have happen in your process, is to step away and come back. I often encourage people to get up out of your chair, stand back across the room and look at your painting, because if these elements aren't working together, the detail I'm putting on this leaf doesn't make any difference at all. So, make sure that the big elements are working together, the lights, the darks, the values, the composition, all of that type of thing, so that it all works together properly. Sorry. when something pops up on the chat, I get distracted reading it and then I forget what I'm saying. Like I said, you can't do two things at once. So, all right. So what's next? I'm going to start putting in some of my darker greens for my branches. Some of the greenery down here, I'm going to put some darker greens in there, and I might even connect a couple of branches, but we'll see. So I definitely need a darker green. So I'm still working off of this same puddle. Let's work from this same puddle here. I'm going to add more cobalt blue. Obviously too much blue. It's not too much blue. I want a bigger puddle, so it's not too much blue. But I do need a more color to water ratio. So I do need this less thinned than the last one if I want it darker. But once again, I have a color that is like ridiculously too unnatural. Like nothing in nature looks like this. So I'm going to take, I could take the complementary color. I could dull that down that way. I'm going to take some of this neutral tint and add that in. And that will give me a nice dark green without shifting the green too much. So that's going to dull that down very nicely. So that's going to give me some of the dark greens that you see right here. And I can work from this puddle. There we go. Once again, using my large brush here, just tap a little bit off, and I'm going to be holding my brush way back here and using the side of the bristles rather than the point, right? I'm not going to try to deliberately paint. So I am, if you're painting like this, it looks less natural. But the one thing I do have to be careful of is, of course, my tree trunk. I don't want to have a lot of green on my tree trunk, so I have to kind of skip around that. If I have too much on my brush, I can just dabble it. I'm dancing around some of the light areas as I go. And none of this looks really great so far, but it's amazing some of the last minute touches that you do, pull it all together. And I think that's where a lot of people get kind of tripped up is, they get to this stage and they go, oh, it's not looking right. I'm going to have to start again. And I hear that, like, it's a ridiculous amount of times that I hear that. It's like, no, you're fine. Just keep going. You just got to keep pushing through, because the best is yet to come. I am trying to follow the contour of these branches as I come down. The foliage, the way the foliage goes, it's kind of cascading down and curling up a little bit. At least from what I can tell from that little picture. If you are looking at the reference, if you've already got the reference from my reference post, you can probably see it a lot better than I can right now. But as I said, I'm not really that worried about getting this too precise. I'm more concerned about just getting the feeling of the painting. So I'm kind of painting around stuff here so that I don't I don't cover up my nice highlight areas. A little bit over here on the right hand side. The ones on the right hand side, I don't know, they seem a little bit lighter, perhaps. I'm going to add a little more yellow. The side of your brush for creating foliage, it's just, there's nothing like it. It just is so natural looking. I just think that's one of my favorite ways of doing foliage. See if I can get the tree the tree in there without getting the edges all wonky. All right, I want to have a little bit come down in here too. A little different than the photo, but I'm okay with that. Some of these parts are drying, and I can actually add more. That just adds more dimension. When you add 3 values, you need 3 values to create dimension. So we're building up here, and I'm really going to be focusing on things like the differences in the values. Not doing too much in terms of soft and hard edges at this point, but I'm just getting in some of the foliage. All right, so I want to get a little bit of the texture down here in the foreground as well. And for that, I'm going to be using a brown. One of my favorite browns is burnt sienna, and either ultramarine blue or cobalt. I'll use cobalt because that's what I have been using. I want continuity in my painting, so I'll use cobalt. Cobalt, burnt sienna will give me a nice brown. And I need to take a lot of this off because I don't need a lot of dark. I'm not doing big shapes like that. I want to get just a very slight amount of texture on here. So I don't need very much on my brush at all. And you can see as I scrub it across the paper, It's not picking up much of the color, only the high points of the paper. The texture on the paper is giving me some of that. So if you're using like a hot press paper or smooth paper, this of course isn't going to work as well. I don't want too much darkness here. I can always sort of blot as I go along. That lightens up the effect as well. I'm just trying to get away from that ultra smooth looking area that I've got here where that wash is. I mean, it's nature, right? So we need to have some texture. There's other ways of going about this. I could have spattered some of this texture or some of this color in while that wash was wet. I could spatter on dry if I wanted some texture. I could have, well, I don't think that putting down salt would have really given me the correct effect, because that would give me light areas, not dark areas. These dark areas are implying that there are leaves or other bits of twigs or whatever on the ground, and they are making a shadow. These are in bright sunshine, so these need to have some texture. The ground in nature just isn't perfectly smooth like a tabletop. You can tell how dry my brush actually is by how little is going onto the paper. Okay. I could also create some of this same texture in the tree trunk. So I'm going to just continue some of this right up my tree. But again, this is not the dappled light, what I'm doing right now. This is the texture on the tree. And because my tree goes this way, my strokes go that way. A little tricky to get in between some of these green areas, but do your best. Not very much. Just, things look a little rougher, more rustic, I guess, with all this texture that I'm putting in. Okay, are we at the point yet where we can put in some of that? No, I think I want to put a little bit of texture into this, but I don't want it to be brown because this is more of a, I don't know what that is. That's like mossy area or something like that. So I'm going to use some green, but I'm going to make it more of a yellowy green. Once again, I'm taking a lot of the excess off of the brush here. Here, when I was doing my dry brushing, I actually wanted to put down a fair bit of color. I wanted to create the foliage. This is a lot more of a sort of a dusting of dry brush. All right, let's try some of this. Okay, so we're getting some of the green through here. So you will see, now you'll start to see the separation of those colors when they're very, very similar value. as these were, it was really hard to tell them apart. But now that I'm putting a little texture on here, and the darker colors are different colors, you can see a little better what exactly is going on. Okay, so all of this, it kind of looks messy at the moment, and but the big moment is coming where we're going to be putting in some of the darker values here. So on the dappled light for the tree, let me zoom in a little bit here so that not zoom in on the, just get the picture a little bit bigger for you here for a second. Okay, so can you see the angle of light on the tree? The sun, you can tell where the sun is because it is going, you can see the angle of light on those tree trunks. Then you have the branches, and those are making this lacy effect on the tree as well. And I love this part. This, that once you start getting some of these extra darks in here, they really start looking good. Now that I'm zoomed in, I'm thinking, oh, these are going to be way too light. I know they are. But I can come back and build up on that. But let's talk about the dappled light. So the sun is coming in this direction. It's overhead, afternoon, mid-afternoon perhaps. And it's coming down. And the shadows are so dark. This is exactly what's going to make it feel like there's bright sunshine. So if your painting looks like this, it's far from done because the main attraction hasn't come yet. So I'm going to take and this brown color that I made here, I think I'm going to make that darker. So I've got this was my burnt sienna cobalt mixture. So I've got a brown there. I'm going to put neutral tint into that. And that's going to give me a much darker brown. So maybe a little warmer, like add a little bit more burnt sienna. And I've got something that looks really, really, really dark. All right, so this is going to be like this type of dry brush where I come in. Actually, it's not going to be that much dry brush. It's going to be wet. I'm going to correct myself there. It's going to be quite wet. So as I come down the tree, what I want to do is I want to skip over these areas of dappled light, always keeping in mind that angle. So up near the top, my brush is really full. And I have to dance around those little branches that are in front, the greenery that's in front. And you can almost get away with anything here. I guess, little shapes, big shapes, but always that sort of prominent diagonal. You'll notice that there's no light hitting the very, very far left, but it comes pretty close, like closer than you might think. So I suspect that the sun is, I'm trying to remember where it was when I was taking this picture, but it was probably almost overhead. You can see those spaces I'm leaving in between. But the thing about filling up your brush with your color is really important, because if you don't fill your brush, you will have breaks in this shadow, and that's not how shadows work. You don't have seams in the shadow. You want it seamless as you go. So everything, all this color needs to be wet, connected to wet. But what's so important is to, if you don't get your first layers light, this doesn't feel like it is, this just doesn't feel like it is strong enough. It feels like your light is weak, almost like those days when you see the sun that is filtered through a light cloud cover, you know, just a hazy kind of day. Trying to get this a little bit stronger, and of course you can see now that, you know, there's some of these things that are too light. When you're doing this, try to get it dark enough on the first go, because this isn't something that you want to do more than once. This is still wet, so I can drop more color in. Because it's wet. If that dries, I don't want to have to try to repeat what I've just done. That's kind of silly. Now, they're all of equal, all the light is of equal strength right now. I am going to come back and adjust some of that, just so you know, just so you don't think, ugh, that's not very nice, what I've done. But I will come back and adjust some of that. It's almost like holes in lace, really. That's what it reminds me of anyway. Okay, I'm going to stop at the bottom of the tree there. I want to continue this shadow out into the ground. Well, actually, maybe I will just continue this. So I'm going to come over into this area over here. I'm going to take more, I have to mix more color here. So neutral tint with some brown in it. Just going to grab my fan brush here for a moment, and I'm going to just put in a few grasses just by sweeping up. I didn't even put any paint on the brush. I just took some of the paint that was there and just pulled it up to make the illusion of some grasses. And I'm just going to stop there for a moment because I want to do something a little different when I come down into here. But I'm going to go back up and finish some of these other trees. So this tree is actually split. I didn't notice that when I drew it, but that's okay. Yes, I did this part quite different than the reference, but I can use the same concept as I did on the left-hand tree, which looks like a leopard right now. It looks ridiculous, but I'm coming back to that, so fear not. We'll see if we can make something out of that. Working around some of the light areas of the tree. The foliage, I mean. All right, let's keep going here. Sometimes there's darker areas, where there's a heavy branch covering. You don't see a lot of the dappled light coming through. Other areas you're going to see a lot. I'm sort of painting this quickly, similar to what I might do if I were painting en plein air. Because you have to work quickly. The light changes far too fast for you to keep up in plein air. Okay, so I'm not going to go out into the ground too much here. I just want to come back up to this other tree, and we'll get a lot of this in here. Trying to maintain a similar angle on all of these. This one doesn't seem to have as much light hitting it. Keep that brush nice and full so that it all looks like it's all connected properly. Just going to zoom in a little bit. There we go. All right. Okay. So I've got the idea happening here now. So I want to talk about what's going to happen on the ground. So on the ground, when it comes to doing the dappled light there, I want things to be a little bit softer. So I'm going to begin with dampening this area. Now this is all dry, so I'm not going to bother it by getting it wet. Okay, so you can see I've wet the whole thing. It's too wet to paint into right now. I want it a little bit damp when I actually put the color on so that I can put in the colors and they start to look a lot more soft around the edges. And the reason that happens, and I've talked about this in other demos as well, is that when you have a light, let me see if I can bring something over here. When you have something close to the, that's not giving me the right light I need. Well, you can see the light from my hand, the shadow from my hand. You can see that, right? So my hand is really close to the paper. Now, as I pull away, look how soft the edges get. And then they start to get a lot crisper as my hand goes closer to the paper. And so the tree foliage is actually a fair distance from the ground. So we need to have a lot more softness happening in our cast shadows on the ground, that's dappled light. So if I work on wet, because mostly I've been working on dry so far, but if I'm working on wet, one thing I have to do that's very different than what I've been doing so far is I need a brush that's much drier. All right, so I'm going to blot my brush so that it doesn't have a lot of moisture in it. I'm looking for a shine on the paper that is just barely there, like hardly, yeah, like you can only barely tell that the paper's wet. That's the sort of look I'm looking for when I tilt and look at the shine on the paper. Like there's still kind of a lot of damp surface there, or wet surface. I'm looking for only a damp surface. So you can wait for that all to absorb, or I could just very, very gently tap the excess off with my paper towel. All right, so if I do that, no, I don't know if you can see any shine left. There's a hint of shine, but let's try this. I blotted my brush, so my paper's damp. It's not wet, it's only damp. And I'm going to go into my color. I have to make sure I have enough color mixed up here, so let me mix up a little more. This is neutral tint with a bit of burnt sienna. All right, so this is where I need to make sure I'm taking a lot of the, that I don't have a really, really wet brush as I'm doing this. Just noticing I missed a spot there. So just get that connected. All right, so here we go. I'm going to come in and start creating the shadows on the ground. Oh, that's going to end up too light. I need stronger color, and it's actually bleeding a little more than I want. So I'm going to wait a little longer for some of this to soak into the paper, and I want to make sure that my brush isn't trapping a lot of extra moisture. So I'm going to blot my brush and pick up just this color. Now you can see if I if I do this and it doesn't fill back in, this consistency is more what I need. If it fills back in, like a wet puddle, would typically, then that would be too wet for what I want to do. Now I have a palette that's well used, and those will separate like that and no problem. But if you have a brand new palette, you might find that it is that it always just kind of flows back together. Pardon me. And that's sort of the downside to having a new palette, is that it will often sort of bead back up again. So I'm continuing with this lacy effect, but I do want to pay attention to one or two things here. Okay, I'm getting that nice softness, but I have to make sure that this has enough color. When you work on a wet surface, it dilutes the color you're putting down. So you have to be careful that you are actually using enough color here. This is not something you want to do 2 times. Trust me on that. But getting back to the palette issue, you can use a little Vim or like cream cleanser to soften that a bit. And that, or to scuff up and give your palette a little bit of tooth so that you can do that. Well, getting too much, and you really have to resist the urge to make it too even. This is so hard to do. I don't know why it's so hard to do, but it is. You just always want to make everything even. It's human nature. Okay. Are you getting hard lines? If you're getting hard lines, that might mean your paper's not it's drying too much. If it's bleeding out, your paper's too wet. And so it's like it's like walking a tightrope when you are doing this sort of thing, because you need the paper just right. So when I run into issues where things are drying faster than I want them to, my secret weapon is to dampen it. And I'm using a synthetic brush here, and I'm making sure it's blotted, and it's a little damp. Like, when you touch it, you can tell it's wet, but you wouldn't know otherwise. And you can dampen an area or soften an area. So if I'm going to paint right in here, for example, let's say I'm going to paint right down here. So I'm going to take this and just brush it in this spot. Like, you can tell, I don't know if you can see, you can't really see the paper bouncing, but there's an air pocket in here. And that tells me the paper's not dry, but it's dry enough that I'm getting hard edges. So it's always that tricky balance that, we're always trying to strive for when we're painting in watercolor. Just the right moment. Wet and wet is by far harder than painting on dry paper by a mile. All right. So this is damp. It doesn't have a shine. I used that synthetic brush. Didn't have too much water. Got it just a little wet. And hopefully, as I paint these in, they'll have a nice sort of soft edge, which I think I'm getting. But you need a strong color in your brush in order to have it not end up too washed out. You might suggest, I've had a lot of people suggest, well, why don't you just use a spray bottle? Well, the spray bottle will put speckles in all of the shadows that you've already established, and it really won't give you, like that's even harder to control, I think. So I don't use a spray bottle if I'm trying to soften these edges. It's the soft surface is the secret here. You want to make sure that you are working on a damp surface to get those soft effects. So I'm blotting this one because I see this one looks a little too harsh. So I'm going to just set it down there, and that will soften up. Pretty sure this has dried already, so let's and off to the side there I'm blotting this brush. And I'm trying to kind of get this in as quickly as I can because, you know, time's of the essence. Dampening that spot, and then I'm going to put some more shadows in here. And you really don't even see where I connected that. You know, it's blended together pretty well. So let's continue on over to this side. Again, this flat brush. Dampening this area. I'm going to zoom out just a little bit so you can see sort of as I'm blotting my brush and that sort of thing. So didn't need it this soft on the tree. The branches were a lot closer to the tree trunk, but on this ground we don't need to have that much. Didn't get it very damp there. Linda says she cleaned her palette with a SODT. I don't know what that is. A sod scrub? Soft scrub, got it. Okay. Soft scrub, got it. If some of these turn out a little darker than others, that's perfectly okay. Guess what? There's some branches that are a little further away. They're going to be softer. Oop. Getting a couple of drier patches there. I'm trying not to swipe. If I swipe my brush, what will happen is it will make a streak, right? I just want to soften the area, so I'm just sort of putting the brush there. Now I've got this one. I should have softened it when I did it earlier, but let's see if I can soften any of it now. I'm going to dampen this. And blot it. That's feeling better, although it's still a little dark right here. So I'm going to lift a little bit right there too. All right, so let's talk about the trees now. The actual trees, they look very strange. So I want to put in more, I'm going to glaze in some more color onto the tree trunks. But I want to be careful not to overdo this. I don't want to lose those lights that are so important. So raw sienna. Bit of, let's put a little of the brown into it. And I want to tone down some of this. So I'm going to go into some of these areas, not all, just some of the areas, and tone down where I think that, you know, the contrast is too strong. So here, if I brush over, I'm glazing over top. If I brush over, I am literally softening what's already there. It's also moving around some of the paint that's already on the paper, and that will definitely soften things as well. See, that feels a lot more natural now that you've, you know, toned it down. Don't be too scared of the contrast. You can always reduce the contrast. It'd be much harder for me to repeat all of the dark in order to get it dark. This glazing idea is a lot easier. So keep that in mind when you are trying to build your watercolor from the ground up. Okay, so I'm thinking our poor tree needs some branches. So let's take some of this shadow color here, because those tree branches are pretty dark. And I need to have some of these come out from the tree trunk. So as the branches come out, sometimes they're like the base of the tree, you know, where it flares out a little bit. Some of the branches will have a little bit of the same sort of thing going on. If you're seeing it from an absolute profile. Now, if it's coming from the front of the tree or the back of the tree, of course, that doesn't apply. But we need to have some of the branches coming through here. I'm still using this big brush, but actually I could probably switch to something more like a, what do you call it, a rigger brush or something like this. What is this? This has no markings on it anymore. Nothing, absolutely nothing, but it is a rigger or liner brush, similar to, what's this one? So this is probably a 2 or larger rigger. Now I'm looking, most of these branches, there's some of these branches that are actually almost hanging straight down, which is a little odd, but that's the nature of some of these trees, right? And you'll notice how I skipped over some of the foliage in the foreground. And I do think I do need to do a little more with this foliage, I think. It doesn't quite, it looks a little bit too wimpy at this point. Actually, the whole scene looks a little bit light on the screen. What I've painted, anyway, it looks a little light on the screen. But now, some of these branches are out in the light, and I know that I didn't really save them with masking fluid or anything like that. I do know there's some light on these branches. I'm going to use a little bit of white paint in the end in order to get some of that dappled light, but I'm not going to use pure white. I'm just going to tint it a little bit. So we'll do some of that. See if we can make something of this. And really pay attention to the gnarliness, I guess, if you're looking for a word, gnarliness of the tree. You know, where it's got like really good elbows, that sort of thing. And then in some of the areas, now, depending on the kind of reference that you're working from, you may actually get some really complex areas of greenery and branches and that sort of thing. And what I will often do, when things get like really cluttered, shall we say, with a lot of branches, is I do something, well, I'm just going to call it scribbling, right? And it's just implying the busyness in all these branches. We know that there's like a lot of branches up in there, so let's just imply it. Not going to try to connect every dot sort of thing. All right, so I want to build up some of my values a little bit more. I definitely think some of these greens need to be stronger. So I'm going to, let's get a little more blue in there. I don't usually hold my paper towel in my hand, but I do it when I'm demonstrating something so you can see if I'm blotting. I'm going to add a little more neutral tint into that to make it even stronger, real shadow kind of color. Dry brushing, I think, is one of those skills that you really, it needs practice for sure, but it can be like a really nice signature. You can just really hit and create some interesting brush strokes and things like that. Can make it really interesting. And the more darks I add into this scene, the more this is going to feel dimensional and believable. And I do think I want to do something with that back shore. It kind of looks like it's hard to see what it is. I don't want the detail, but I also I need some context for these trees. So I think I'm going to do a little something with that background. It would have been good to do that at the beginning, but sometimes you get to a certain stage in your painting and you realize, oh, that doesn't look right. So you do need to revisit some areas sometimes. The more painting you do, the better you get at identifying that sort of stuff right at the beginning of your painting process. But I know that for a lot of you, that may not be the case. So it's good to know you can go back to revisit areas. Let's put a little more green in there. I'm going to put, I'm going to strengthen some of my lighter color as well, I think. Just make it a little bit more texture in here. I'm not really trying to darken it. That's not the goal here. I want to make my highlights have a little bit of shape to them as well. So not as watered down color, that sort of thing. Not as muted color, I should say. The shadows will have the muted colors. The sunshine will have the bright colors. All right, so I don't need very much to imply something in this distance. I just need a very little bit of color, muted color, because it's far away. And I'm just going to do a little bit of dry brushing back in there. And it's amazing, just that little bit of dry brushing. It's like, oh, that's trees back there, and you know immediately what it is. But I will need more than just one layer of dry brush. What I will need is for that to dry, and then I'll have to come in and build up something else there. Like on top. All right, so now I feel, oh, okay, there's a shore back there. I do need to do something with this water. This water is looking a little bit more like a lake than a stream, so we do need to have some texture in there. Apologies for jumping around, but this is one of the necessary aspects of watercolor. You need to let one thing dry, and you could just sit and wait, I guess, but much better to move on to something else. So I'm going to take my blue and dull it down with some of the neutral tint. I'm borrowing from a puddle here. Actually, let me reduce my picture because you cannot see my palette as I do this. There. So I'm borrowing from this puddle right here. And I'm going to, once again, I'm going to dry brush. But this time, because we have a stream that is running very horizontal, we need to, and sorry, I'm tilting it because that's an easier direction for me. But I am going to dry brush in a straight line here. Kathy, you're asking, which do I prefer, cold or hot press paper? Definitely cold. I almost never use hot press paper. I find it very challenging to do washes because hot press, just before I paint this, hot press is where when they manufacture the paper, they use a hot press, basically like an iron, and smooth out the surface. That compresses all the fibers of the paper, meaning that they, when fibers are compressed, they're not as absorbent. So it makes it harder for a wash to sort of melt into the paper and even out. It sits more on the surface and moves around. Now, hot press paper, I'm not putting it down. I'm just saying for washes, it's not great. But it's fabulous for detail work. Like if your painting personality or your painting style is where you like to use a lot of small brushes, a hot press, you might love it because you can use a small brush and get a lot of detail. All right, so here we go with some dry brush across the water. And you can see motion in the water as I do this. Okay, so there's some water texture going on here. And you've got to make sure you go all the way to the tree. If you stop short of the tree's going to have this very weird looking halo around it. So same on this side. Blotting my brush so it doesn't have too much paint. So I'm coming from the right or I'm coming from the left, but it's always in a straight direction. Now I may do this several times in order to build up this water texture or value. I might do it several times in order to complete this. I've left a lighter area up there. Okay, so making sure I leave some of those lighter areas where I suspect some of the water is tumbling over rocks or something. There's Now, despite the fact that this goes down on an angle, it's very tempting to follow that angle, but I have to continue going straight across because that's the way water flows. Okay, so I can revisit this and I can do even more texture. Blot my brush so it's not too wet. Because this has dried now. And I can go over top. So I can increase any texture in my painting by just letting a layer dry and then adding more. My goodness. Didn't realize it was running on to noon here. So let's finish this one up. And if I had, for example, trees of a different color back in here, I could also do some dry brushing with the greenery. Like I see that there's a little bit of green, hints of green through there. So I'm going to do a little of this through that area as well. And you see that that feels like it's a reflected area. It's reflecting some green from the shore on the other side. So this one's really loaded with texture, this painting. Bringing a little green across there and then back to blue. So my brush strokes can come upstream too. But so that little bit of light there might imply the water that's hitting some of the rocks underneath the surface or something. But it gives some really nice texture to the water. I think I could go a little duller here. If I want to dull it down, I could add a little bit of burnt sienna or a little bit of neutral tint. Just make sure it's getting a little duller. It's a little bit too pretty blue right now. And value-wise, it needs to be fairly dark. This was a pretty dark shadow on this shore, and the water, it really isn't that much lighter. It's barely lighter than that. So this is at the end of my paintings. I'm always doing this sort of value check. Sounds like something you'd find at a grocery store, a value check. But it's I'm checking to see, like I'm making comparisons to values. You know, is this the right amount of light compared to this? If this feels too light, I might have to darken it. Or if this is feeling too dark, I might have to darken this. Just to make the relationships in the painting work together. That's so important, I think, you know, to really evaluate that at the end of your painting, or, you know, at best as you go, but, you know, to do a final evaluation at the end of your, at the end of the process, so that you can see whether or not you need to make more adjustments. Just because you painted it doesn't mean it's done. So you can see this water's getting darker and darker all the time as I'm building up these values, and I'm just putting a layer on top of a layer. It looked okay, like it wasn't terrible or anything like that, but it definitely did need to have more done to it. The value relationship wasn't correct. Doesn't make the tree stand out enough. Doesn't, you know, just in relationship to the shore in the foreground. So this feels like it's really in sun at this point, and so that's what I will do with a lot of my paintings, is just sort of step back. And I can see actually that there's quite a lot I need to do on this, but you know, we're already 2 hours in. I think I'm probably going to wrap it up. But I think you get the gist of how this is established. Get your light areas built up first, so that those really feel sunny. And don't be afraid to make your darks dark. It's that comparative contrast is what really is going to make it feel like that dappled light. So let me zoom out so you can see the actual whole picture all at once. A little more. There we go. Okay, so that's the essence of it. I do feel like, yeah, there's some things that need darkening, you know, so I'll do a little bit just to show you, but I would come in and probably darken up some of the values on the tree trunk here. Take me quite a while to do this, so I'm not going to spend the whole time showing it, but you'll get the idea of it. So if I get some of those darker, this leaf really pops out now. Boy, you can really tell that that's in front. Putting my arm in wet paint here, but I come in and darken a little bit of this one tree, then you'll get the idea that you can come back and you can darken some of these things. And as I go, I may not be trying to duplicate exactly what I did. I might have a little halo around each of those sunlit areas. And there is some texture on the tree, so I don't have to worry too much. But you can see that having that darker contrast there really helps a lot. And I can see that there's more areas where that would be very useful. to come in. I prefer not to do this twice, but sometimes if it dries too light, well, you have no choice. But I could come in and darken that. And you can feel that it feels like it has more than one or two values. You need at least 3 values to create form. So Carol's saying, for future, I'd love to see a quick plein air demo. Yes, actually, you know what? If I'd been on the ball, I could have actually got out there today. It's pretty not too bad, although they are calling for rain later, so I'm not sure if I'd get caught or not. But yeah, absolutely. Plein air is it's like a different animal. trying to paint in plein air. So let me just come back on screen here for a minute. So I'm just checking all the last minute questions to see if I've missed anything. Let me see here. Yeah, I would say, if you're following along to the demo and you're trying it on your own, probably make these darker than I did, and then glaze to get some of the softness back in there. If you have nothing but hard edges in the dappled shadows, like this type of thing, where am I? If you have nothing but hard lines there, it can look a little bit harsh, but a little bit of glazing over top will soften some of that. Can't I clean my palette with? Okay. Apologies if I'm missing any of the questions. If you can maybe pop it in there real quick before I go, like repeat it or copy it and paste it back into the chat, then I won't miss it. But I can't see anything that I skipped. Yeah, I do have a couple of, yes, that's right. Brazen Hearted is telling us that I have a couple of plein air videos already, but not where I've like taken a full sheet and really done it. Most of the plein air's been kind of sketchy, like sketches rather than, little watercolor sketches, more so than an actual completed painting. So I could try to do a more completed painting in a future plein air video. Now that we have, I'm a fair weather plein air painter. I don't like to paint when it's raining, so I will do that. Which brush am I using for the dry brush? For the dry brush, I was still using that squirrel hair brush. This is, and once again, I have no markings left on the brush. This is a squirrel hair brush, and relative to my baby finger, that's about the size of it. I think this one's like a 10. I think they call it a 10, but the size doesn't necessarily mean anything because it can be very different depending on where the origin of the brush is or the company that makes it. Do I ever offer workshops? Yes, I do. I have many workshops that are recorded that are on my website, which is shelleypryor.com. You can see many of the recorded workshops that I had there, and I'm going to be adding to that, as a matter of fact. So I take a look in the next week or so. I'm going to be adding a number of videos that I did during COVID as private videos or private workshops, but now I'm going to release them for public, and you can take a look at some of those. There's some really interesting ones there. And yeah, and there's been a number of workshops that I'll do. I mean, I'll teach across Canada. Right now, I'm going to try not to do too much south of the border, just because of you know, and we'll see about that. But I can certainly do Zoom workshops and so on. So anyway, if you or your group have an inquiry about a workshop, you can just contact me by my website. Okay. So I'm going to let you go. I've kept you long enough. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope you have an absolutely fantastic week. Bye for now.